I miss the Cambridge recording studio, the dark HVAL that you used to be in. Yeah, I think we've recorded in every single place I've lived in. Yeah, since my start at Cambridge, so I was living in this year. It was a HVAL like the smallest dwelling I'd ever lived in. Smaller than the barracks in the Air Force, believe it or not. It was a shoe box, and it was such a step down. Because when I was living in New Haven in undergrad, I was getting a stipend from the GI Bill. I had a pretty nice apartment. It was spacious, high ceilings, but Cambridge required all the postgrad students for their first year to live in their Res, in their college. And I was like, oh, it's Cambridge. It's going to be grand. It's going to be Hogwarts. And I get there and it's a shoe box with a single bed and a tiny little desk. And that's where you and I recorded the first one for Modern Wisdom. Well, I think it's very important for you to keep your feet on the ground. I don't think you get too big for your boots. Published author, tons of books sold, very highly followed on Substack. Remember where you came from, a hobble in Cambridge. Yeah, that's what I tell people, when I was at Cambridge struggling, sleeping in that 12x12 prison cell. But yeah, now I finally had nothing on this. The foster care system was a walk in the park. No. I had always liked this when I would watch other podcast guests and they had, the beautiful background with the books and everything, and I am working my way up to that. This is like stage one. Eventually I'll have, the grand library behind me. Yeah, one step at a time. What do you make of this as having a boyfriend cringe now article? Yeah, that was going around. So I first came across that Vogue magazine article. It was a reel on Instagram and someone was commenting on it. And then I saw that this magazine article is having a boyfriend, embarrassing, inspired, 1,000 Instagram reels, TikTok, all these commentaries. And so I went back and read the actual piece. It was as a striking headline, and the first thing it made me think of was intersexual competition. Because as I'm reading this article, the author, she's talking about, influencers and podcast hosts, these women, with a lot of influence and status. And they're talking about how, they try to not talk about their boyfriends that much, or they try to discourage other women from entering relationships. This idea of heteropatalism. But of course, the funny thing to me was these women themselves are in relationships. And she would ask, well, why are you promoting these ideas? And these women would say, well, I don't want to seem boastful, I want to show solidarity with single women, and I understand how difficult the dating market is right now. And so, it is a little embarrassing to post about my relationship online, and this kind of thing, and to me, connecting it with evolutionary psychology, I think. There are some interesting principles here around, competition, reproductive suppression, and that kind of thing. So I wrote this Substack article, which is one of my I very rarely come up with titles that I'm proud of. Usually they're serviceable. Kind of gets the idea of the piece, but this one, girl boss gatekeeping, was the one I came up with, and it captures this idea that if you're a woman with power, status, influence, and so on, you have some non-trivial effect on the behavior of other women. And if you are telling them that maybe it's not worth it to date anymore, us men are trash, it's so hard out there, having a boyfriend is embarrassing now anyway. But then privately you're in a relationship, and you are, following those conventional life script patterns. You're kind of indirectly suppressing other women's ability to find partners to reproduce and that kind of thing. Is this a luxury belief using your nomenclature? Yeah, I think it's almost there. So I listened to this very interesting discussion by this evolutionary behavioral scientist, Dani Silikowski. And she's done a few interviews on this question of reproductive suppression. And one thing she points out is a lot of this antinatalist messaging comes from elite institutions, people with platforms, journalists and academics and corporate leaders of I see this a lot in social science journals, for example, like the motherhood penalty, that kind of thing of, oh, if you have children, you're going to be penalized in the labor market. But you never see the reverse framing where if you choose to work and not stay with your kids, this is also a penalty in a way, because there's a limited window of your child's life where you can spend a lot of time with them, and where you're literally the number one person in their world. And so every hour you spend in the workplace is an hour you're not watching your child grow and develop and learn, and form that kind of attachment. And so if elite institutions and elite, high status individuals are promoting this idea, but then privately you see that marriage rates are the highest among highly educated people, privately, they're more likely than others to have children. Now this was an interesting analysis by The Economist magazine last year, which found that a lot of if you break down the results by socioeconomic status, it's actually low-income women whose fertility has declined the most, whereas college-educated women's fertility has declined slightly, but not by very much. But the lower you go on education and income, the higher the kind of fertility decline. And so is it a luxury belief? Well, I define luxury beliefs as ideas and opinions that confer status on the affluent, while inflicting costs on the less fortunate members of society. And you see people promoting one set of views that makes them look compassionate and understanding, and I understand how hard it is out there, and maybe this isn't worth it anyway. But then by promoting these views, they're actually reducing pathways to happiness for other people. This is like consistent finding Brad Wilcox and others who I know you've had on the show. There's a ton of data in sociology showing that the happiest people are married people with children. If you look at women, single women without children are the least happy. They report the lowest levels of happiness. Unmarried women report slightly higher levels of happiness than that. And then married women with children report the highest levels of happiness of all. And so if I'm trying to promote an idea, trying to shape your behavior in such a way that will reduce your happiness, then that there is a kind of an element of a luxury belief there. Well, I think there's two things going on. There is what is being said, laudable solidarity, very Gen Z, TikTok trend. How does this look in terms of my personal brand, swag gap, aura, all that stuff? And then there is what's the motivation that might be a little bit deeper than this? So I think the thing that I thought that was interesting up first was the article is looking at much of relationships through almost like an influencer first perspective. That how other people see you, particularly women, particularly online, is the most important currency that you as a woman have to trade. And this ties in with Freya India's idea, which is most relationships now are more brand collaborations than they are meaningful connections. Wow, yeah, damn, that is good. Yeah, and it's funny, like a lot of society seems to be participating in this, discouraging of committed relationships, bonds, family formation. You brought up Freya India there. I remember a really interesting essay of hers where she pointed out that if you are a 23-year-old woman and you're a recent college grad, you're in the workforce, you're hustling, you're struggling, you're working hard, and you're dating around. You're on the apps, you go on a date here and there. Your parents are probably just thinking, okay, good. This is what you should be doing at this age. Dating, exploring yourself, whatever. But then Freya pointed out that if you are a 23-year-old woman and you tell your parents, I'm engaged, a lot of educated upper middle class parents would respond with horror like, you're too young for this, you're going to ruin your career, like you're derailing your life, like why are you giving up everything for this guy, that kind of thing. And this is like the reverse of what you would expect in more traditional societies, or even our society up until maybe 50, 60 years ago, that if you're a young woman and you find a guy you like enough to want to marry, your family would celebrate. Society would celebrate, and now it's literally the reverse. That's interesting. I wonder what sort of parents would be like that. At least in my experience, all of my friends who have got married pretty young, their parents were super stoked for them, but that might just be I might have an unreasonably normal and responsible set of friends with parents. But yeah, when it comes to the cringe aspect, a lot of this was around social embarrassment, rejection. Again, we're talking about the shallow, upfront, lauded reasons before we get into the sort of deeper motivations for this. But it seemed to be a lot to do with female intrasexual social status. How do other women see me? The article talks about how if you post about your boyfriend online, you're going to lose followers. It doesn't mention that you lose followers that are mostly male because they were hoping that they might be able to tap it, and now that they know you've got a boyfriend. You remember when Brett Cooper announced that she got married, and the comments were just tons and tons of guys going it's over bros, like the same thing will happen when Freya India gets married. The same thing, I'm sure would have happened if Louise Perry had been online before she got married. Like any sort of public-facing woman, a good portion of your following are guys that